our biggest problem right now is that we really are wondering, are we going crazy or is the world crazy? Am I crazy for thinking that the world is going crazy? So I want to reassure people and help them to think clearly about these things.
What is happening to our world? Why does it seem like everyone has gone insane? Why are so many things that seemingly everyone believed the day before yesterday suddenly held to be retrograde, hateful, and even criminal? And why are the things that everyone seemed to view as lunacy the day before yesterday suddenly are taught and even required? Those are questions from time to time I receive as I travel, and the author of this book has certainly run into those as well. He is Dr. Jay Budziszewski, who's been on the program with us before. Remember our conversation about his book, What We Can't Not Know, which all gets into the whole area of common grace and moral theology, the revenge of conscience, and a variety of others. But as I have been promoting, this book is one that is just out, and it's fascinating. A Pandemic of Lunacy, How to Think Clearly When Everyone Around You Seems Crazy. So, Dr. Budziszewski, welcome back to Point of View, and thank you for writing this book.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be back on Point of View.
Peter Kreeft said this book is simply the most complete, clear, and uncompromising account of our decaying culture's insanity that I have read yet. And I started off by talking about the questions I get when we travel around, go to various radio stations that carry this program and meet some of the people that are listeners and donors. And these are the kinds of questions I get, and you get those as well. You admit that you probably have a self-selected audience, but nevertheless, it is, I think, striking that more and more people are saying, how did we get here? And you are really taking on some of those insane kind of ideas, which you call the delusions about various topics. But you've been writing into this some time, haven't you?
Yeah, I've been writing about these things piecemeal for some time. I've been writing about this issue or that issue, a lot about sexual ethics, a lot about government. But here I try to catalog them, to just take them all on, to get them between the eyes. Yeah, I'm not. I don't mean by taking them between the eyes that I'm being hostile. I'm trying to speak in a commonsensical way that appeals to people, because our biggest problem right now is that we really are wondering, are we going crazy or is the world crazy? Am I crazy for thinking that the world is going crazy? So I want to reassure people and help them to think clearly about these things.
I might just mention there are 30 lunacies that you have in your book, and you break them down into 5 categories of delusions. Delusions about virtue and happiness, delusions about politics and government, delusions about family and sexuality, delusions about what it means to be human, delusions about what is real and unreal, and delusions about God and religion. But before we get into some of those, and we won't cover all 30, obviously, you do have a section which I thought was very helpful, and that is why in some respects this has gotten worse. In other words, we have some of these delusions, some of these myths, some of these lunacies, whatever phrase you want to use, but you've talked about 4 reasons why they metastasize, and one of those is that oftentimes once you accept one bad idea, it becomes, as you will, fertile ground for many other bad ideas, doesn't it?
Yes, it often does. For example, if you're used to thinking that men and women are at war with each other, you're predisposed to think that the races are at war to each other, that the rich and the poor are at war with each other, that there is no such thing as the common good. One thing leads to another. There can be other reasons for why these metastasize too, but that is a very big one. Sort of psychological predisposition to believe one thing because you're already believing another.
Well, another one you talk about is bad ideas give rise to unacceptable results. And so whether it's radical individualism or whether it's the fact that, some people seem to be doing better than I, so maybe it has to do with a conspiracy against us or the system is rigged against us. And so in some respects, that leads to all sorts of conspiracy theories, doesn't it?
It leads to conspiracy theories, and it leads to other strange consequences too. You just mentioned, one version of this. If I'm a radical individualist, if I think that it's all about me, I'm looking out for number one. Now, you might think a person like that is going to be strong, independent, self-reliant. What it really means is that he's going to be undisciplined. He's going to have a hard time holding his family together, holding his marriage together, holding his friendships together. And that tends to cause problems for society. There's more and more disorder. So the government then has to try to mop up some of that disorder. And this extreme individualism, paradoxically, can lead to an authoritarian government that tries to do everything.
Wow. Another one you talk about is what you call the revenge of conscience, which we need to kind of explain for just a minute, because it really is this. And Dr. Budziszewski, I've seen this so many times when a particular political party, oftentimes tends to be on the Democratic side, but not exclusively, takes a stand which really isn't popular, really doesn't make a great deal of sense, or for which there is a lot of counter evidence. There are two choices: either repent or dig in. And because repentance is sometimes very difficult for individuals, they double down. And you have seen this so often as you've watched the political arena, haven't you?
I have, indeed. And when we talked about that previous book of mine that you mentioned, What We Can't Not Know, we talked a lot about the revenge of conscience. Doubling down may mean something like this. Let's take an easy example first, just in personal life, not political life. Let's say that you're my friend and I have acted wrong to you. I've acted unjustly to you. I've treated you in a way that you did not deserve. I was maybe angry or something. Now, I can either repent and make up with you, or I can dig in, and I may have a strong motive to dig in because conscience is uncomfortable. When I know that when my conscience is accusing me, I want to deflect that accusation. One way of deflecting it is to convince myself, you deserved the way that I treated you. You really were a bad guy. Now, once I've convinced myself of that, well, a guy as bad as you deserves all kinds of bad treatment. So I go from one bad treatment of you to another bad treatment of you to another one. Now, you mentioned the social issues too. Abortion is a very good example of that. You can't not know that it is wrong to deliberately take innocent human life. That's a matter of common grace, of natural law. You can't not know that. There's nobody alive who doesn't know that, including murderers. Now, that means that if you commit an abortion, you're going to have to convince yourself that either that wasn't a taking, or the life was not, or that the being whom you did away with was not alive, or that it wasn't innocent. Believe it or not, there are some people who say that about the baby in the womb, or that it isn't human, and which is very strange. It's not a dog or a porpoise growing in there, or else you just have to say in the end, sometimes you have to just do the wrong thing to make things come out right. Now, every one of those premises, though, is going to lead you to further wrongdoing. Suppose you say, for instance, that isn't a human being there. Well, why? The philosophies people develop, it's not easy to tell yourself a lie like that. You'll say, well, it's only really human if it can make complex plans and carry them out. Well, all right, toddlers can't either. So is toddler side okay there? Teenagers, frankly, don't make complex plans very well. They're only beginning to learn to act responsibly. Are they not fully human either? Can we take them? So that conscience has its revenge. The premises that we adopt to try to ease our conscience drive us willy-nilly into wrong that we hadn't even intended to justify in the first place.
And I thought, Dr. Budziszewski, we might look at part one there, delusions about virtue and happiness. Of course, you've written a whole book about happiness and things of that nature as well. But many of these get us into this issue of common grace. Basic right and wrong are vague and equivocal. Basic right and wrong are different for everyone. Sometimes we just have to do the wrong thing. You just talked about that a minute ago. There's no such thing as good character. Good character is unnecessary for well-being. And I thought we might just focus on one of those, the idea that basic right and wrong are different for everyone. I'll hold up our booklet that we did a while back, A Biblical Point of View on Postmodernism. But whether you look at postmodernism or you actually dip into Margaret Mead, and we really never have talked about the study she did of South Sea Islanders, that's a good way to begin to look at how even in areas of cultural anthropology, there's just a denial of anything that's absolutely right or absolutely wrong. wrong, and yet you can't function in a society without some of those beliefs. But what were some of the mistakes that maybe came from the original study of Margaret Mead? Because you dip into that, and I think that's something that any student that has taken a class on cultural anthropology usually hears something about, and certainly now we have a whole generation that really buys into this idea of postmodernism. You have your view of truth, I have my view of truth, you have your set of ethics, I have my set of ethics. How do we respond to that?
Well, I'm very glad to say that at least the errors of Margaret Mead have been exploded, and even anthropologists now recognize that she was wildly, wildly wrong. As a matter of fact, a number of anthropologists are now admitting that there seem to be some moral universals. The idea of not killing innocents, the idea that there's some source of divinity greater than ourselves, the idea that we ought to honor our parents, these things are altogether universal. And some anthropologists, although some of them are still trapped in relativism, some of them are acknowledging this. I'm glad. Margaret Mead, now she was a sexual libertine herself, so it was attractive to her to pull the wool over her own eyes. When she observed the customs of the people in the South Seas, she convinced herself that she was looking at people who really thought that any sort of sex is okay. You know, it doesn't have to be marital, it doesn't have to be this, it doesn't have to be that. Later anthropologists who went there just discovered that wasn't even true. As a matter of fact, they apparently the South Sea Islanders highly valued chastity. Now, some people try to get her off the hook in a way by saying, well, she was misled by her native informants who thought, let's play a joke on this funny American anthropology lady. But you can't have a joke, such a huge joke, pulled over your eyes that thoroughly unless you want to be deceived. That's what I call motivated irrationality, and it's behind a lot of these fallacies.
And again, we'll get back to the sexual issues a little bit later. And of course, we've had Carl Trueman on the program, and others, as a matter of fact, did a booklet on that as well as sex and culture. But while we're on this, you have people all the time, Dr. Budziszewski, that will deny that there are any absolutes. Everything is relative. But first of all, you can't live effectively that way, number one. And number two, even though right now it's really controversial in the political realm to talk about posting the Ten Commandments, whether you believe the Ten Commandments came from God or are only restricted to Jewish people or just to Christians, these are sort of universal ideas that you find in other cultures at other times. And so this idea that, well, everybody needs to define for themselves what is right and wrong, that's not the way to have human flourishing, is it?
No, it's not the way to have human flourishing. C.S. Lewis remarked years ago that although we talk about moral relativism, in fact, you can search the world over and you're not going to find a culture in which people think that you should cheat all the people who have been kindest to you in life, or that it is a great and virtuous thing to run away in battle. Nobody really believes that. What people disagree about are not these basic moral universals. What they disagree about is the details. Again, Lewis, he said, just about everywhere in the world, people recognize that you should be faithful to your spouse. Now, they might disagree about whether you can have one or four.
And again, one of the other things you talk about in this section is about this issue of character. And you point out, first of all, we recognize that not everybody's perfect. Even Caligula probably acted kindly at times, and even Mother Teresa maybe sometimes didn't. So that's not the point. But the character that we would want to impart in our children and our grandchildren, the kind of character that allows you to have a functioning society, is something that isn't just optional, is it?
No, it isn't just optional. You would think that everybody would take for granted that, of course, we have to work on building good character. We have to discipline ourselves. We have to try to follow God's law. We should teach our children what is good and inculcate qualities like courage and self-restraint and so forth in them. But when I talk about this in my classes, I teach the classical doctrine of the virtues, the cardinal virtues. It's surprising that I get some pushback. Some of them will say, well, my psychology teachers have explained to me that there's no such thing as good character. There's no such thing as virtue. And they'll tell about an experiment in which some people would even some seminary students would walk past somebody who appeared to be maybe drunk or incapacitated on the sidewalk and not do anything. And they would say, you see, Whether you do the right thing or not, it depends entirely on incentives. It has nothing to do with ingrained character. The experiment didn't show that, and in fact, even the psychologist who conducted it didn't claim that it showed that. But people have taken that and they've run with it, and they think, you see, it provides us with a good excuse. If I don't work on my own character, I feel so much better if I'm able to tell myself there is no such thing as good character. Nobody has it.
Yes.
Now imagine telling your daughter, don't worry that the guy you're thinking about marrying is a lout. There is no such thing as a good character. I hope we don't tell them that.
Yes. And again, that's point of, we do a lot of apologetics on this program, and that's one of the best apologetic answers is that, first of all, you just can't live in that world. You can't live in a world where you say there is no evil. You can't live in a world that says character doesn't matter, which kind of brings us to your second section, which will start, at least, delusions about politics and government. There's no such thing as common good. We can attain common good without virtue. The purpose of government is to take care of all our needs. Scientists, scholars, and experts are neutral authorities. We'll get into that maybe after the break. And democracy is the literal rule of the people. This is an area where you've done a lot of writing, but again, this idea that we can attain the common good without virtue, how many times, and you've had those at the University of Texas at Austin, and I've seen them other places, where you'll have atheists argue that I can be good without God. And we recognize that sometimes we do meet people that aren't necessarily religiously inclined, who nevertheless have a good moral character. And we certainly know some people that are Christians that have really flawed personalities. But there is a sense in which if you really want the common good in a society and in individuals, virtue is essential, isn't it?
Virtue is absolutely essential. People say there's no such thing as a common good. Look, even sunshine, one writer said, isn't a common good because your enjoyment of the sunshine is different than my enjoyment of the sunshine. Well, come on. Virtue really is the common good. If you have virtue, let's say that you're a brave and just and fair person, suppose that you are wise, and suppose you have all of these qualities of character to a greater degree than I do. You know what? You didn't get those qualities by taking them away from me. You didn't steal them from me. And in fact, I gain by your having them. So we have community in this good. It's not even possible to have competition in it, in the sense of one person being able to take it away from others. This is what is meant by the common good, and it really does exist.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue our conversation about this book, The Pandemic of Lunacy, and it is how to think clearly when everyone around you seems crazy. We have information about the book on our website, and I think you will really appreciate that. And when we come back, I did want to pick out one of the other lunacies. Scientists, scholars, and experts are neutral authorities, because some of this came because of COVID, because of the virus, because of the vaccine, because of many of the claims that were made at the time. And so in some respects, even as we were talking about your book the other day before we had you come on, we were talking about how many times people have come to be very skeptical about what experts are saying because of what has transpired over the last couple of years. So we'll get into that.
Hey there, Megan Kitchen here, creator of the Highlights podcast. Sorry to interrupt, but I would like to ask a small favor if I could. If you appreciate anything about today's episode or it enhances your own point of view, would you please let us know? You can do it easily by sending an email to podcastcomments@pointofview.net. When you email us your feedback, it helps me to create more episodes based on topics that help you and your friends discern a biblical perspective on the world. So, penny for your thoughts? Again, that email is podcastcomments@pointofview.net. Now, back to the episode.
Let me just mention we also have a link to theundergroundthomas.org. Don't even have to know how to spell it because we have it on our website there, and you can find out more about Dr. Budziszewski, some of the teaching, his books, his blog, which he enters each week. I think it's every Monday, and all sorts of other things. So that link to the website is there. Of course, information about the book is there in case you would want to get a copy, and I certainly do recommend that. Let's, if we can, focus for just a minute on one of the lunacies, scientists, scholars, and experts are neutral authorities. Kind of reminds me of our booklet that we had a number of months ago that was a biblical point of view on wokeness, because you know only so well during the COVID experience, during the pandemic and then the virus and the masking and all of that, we were told to trust the science. Now, I do trust the science. I think the scientific method has been a wonderful and very effective way to come to truth. But trust the science versus trust the scientist is a little bit different. And I think we've learned only to our dismay that some of those trusted scientists, scholars, opinion leaders, and others weren't as objective as we might have thought they were.
No, that is absolutely true. They weren't. At one point, Dr. Fauci said, these people who are doubting me are really doubting science because I represent science. And he says, that's what worries me. But later on, in testifying before a House of Representatives Select Committee, he admitted that the recommendations that his team came up with, I quote, just sort of appeared. Yes. Now, that doesn't make it sound like they came from science. Now, I think even we need experts. They do know more about certain things, but they don't know everything. And there's a difference between expertise and wisdom. You know, expert judgment can easily go wrong even when people are not biased. At one point in the 20th century, climatologists thought the Earth was becoming colder. I remember when I was a kid, all my grade school science teachers said the world is becoming colder. That's what science tells us. Geologists at one time in the 20th century still thought that the idea of continents moving was absurd. Well, now we know that they do move, and there was a lot of resistance among geologists to the idea of plate tectonics. Or still earlier, we say, oh, it was just crazy that people used to think that the sun orbits the Earth. Of course, the Earth orbits the sun. You know, at one point, the evidence for the hypothesis that the sun orbited the Earth seemed just as good as the evidence for the contrary view. Scientists can make mistakes even when they're not biased, and if they are biased, we've got a problem. That's not the only problem. You know, we can even if we know the answer to something, it's very difficult to know whether is the climate really warming. But suppose we know that, it's still another thing to know, well, how sure can we be of that? How might we be wrong? If warming is real, was it caused by human activity? Maybe, maybe not. If it's can we do anything about it? Should we do anything about it? Could we do any good by trying? Might we do harm by trying? Could warming have any good effects besides bad effects? Those are only partly scientific questions. And basically, what it requires is a political decision, a value decision as to what we're willing to put up with in order to deal with some other kind of risk.
Well said. Well, again, you have a section on delusions about family and sexuality. And again, you've written quite a bit on this over the years in terms of on the meaning of sex and things of that nature. But uncoupling sex from its consequences has no consequences. I think everybody knows the answer to that. Both sexes must make the same choices. Marriage can be whatever we want it to be. That's, of course, the whole issue, same-sex marriage. Manhood and womanhood can take any shapes that we wish. Men and women don't need each other. Again, I'll hold up one of our booklets on transgenderism that we've done, and certainly all sorts of other issues that have surfaced. But I think that of all of those, if you and I, a couple of decades ago when we were doing interviews on some of your books, had suggested that sometime in the 21st century, there would be people that say men can become women, women can become men, men will be allowed to participate in women's sports, I think they would want to institutionalize ourselves, because they would say this is the most wrong-headed set of ideas you've come up with, and yet here we are, once again, showing the pandemic of lunacy.
Yes, it's even crazier than that. At one point, I think they've stopped this when it became known to the public, but some New Jersey hospitals were asking new moms and expecting moms, they hadn't even given birth yet, to fill out forms telling the sexual orientation of their babies. Now, you know, we're up to 95 genders now.
Yes.
There was a program in California at one point, guaranteed income for transgender persons, and you were supposed to check off. There were something like 95 genders there, and you were supposed to check off the one that you wanted. And if your gender wasn't listed, you could fill in the blank. The latest gender, have you heard of this one? The latest gender to come down the pike is xenogender. You know what that is?
No.
It means a gender that cannot be contained by
Oh.
human understandings of gender. And I've got to ask, if it can't be contained by human understandings of gender, how could anybody even know that it is a gender? This stuff just gets crazier and crazier.
Well, again, that's part of that. If you want to use just critical thinking, of course, that's what this book is all about, and many of your other books, you would just begin to say, first of all, this makes no sense. Second of all, this is a self-defeating argument in many cases, and that is the case, which kind of blends into your section on delusions about what it means to be a human. Each human being has his own nature. Human nature is merely animal. Everyone is evil, or deep down, everyone is good. Human nature changes, and we can transcend human nature, which, of course, gets into our booklet I'm holding up right now on transgenderism. But again, transhumanism, excuse me, we're dealing with the fact that each human being has their own nature, and maybe that's just a dedication to an evolutionary idea that human nature is merely an animal. So, Dr. Budziszewski, now we're having people say, well, there's no soul, there's no mind, there's just a brain, you just have a meat computer, you're just a more evolved animal. And as a result, those arguments, which are part of best-selling books in our bookstores, are really based upon a false view of science and certainly a false view of theology, aren't they?
Yes, they certainly are. And, at the root of every one of these lunacies, there is some grain of truth. If there weren't, nobody could fall for them. Every liar knows in order to convince somebody of something that is untrue, he has to pack as much truth into the lie as possible, and just give it a little twist at the end. Now, that's also true of innocent errors. You're more likely to be taken in by a delusion if there's something true there. Take the delusion that each human being has his own nature. Well, it is true enough that you have a different personality than I do. I have a different personality than my wife was. But in the essence of the human being, in being rational beings, embodied beings, not like angels, we are alike. We have a similar ground plan, not just a physical ground plan. I've got arms and legs and a heart and so forth, but we have minds that are oriented toward knowing the truth, especially the truth about God. These are things that we are made with a view to family life. The two sexes are oriented to each other by the design. These are things that we can't change, even though there may be differences in personality. The differences in personality sometimes delude us into thinking, well, I've got a different nature. We shouldn't even say human. We should say you're a type 1 human or something like that. He's a type 6 human, and it's easy to see how we could fall into these things.
One of the things I mentioned just a minute ago, that's in your chapter, We Can Transcend Human Nature, is we a while back did a booklet on transhumanism and also did one of our magazines on the issue of transhumanism. That's actually one of the isms that's on the front of your book, but I found that oftentimes when we say the word transhumanism, people go, trans what? So explain that for just a minute, because this idea that we can even transcend what we are as human beings.
That's right. If you really believe that our nature is not something that was designed, that was intended, that it was given to us by God, but if you really believe that our nature was just the meaningless and purposeless result of a process that did not have us in mind, well, then why not transcend our nature? Why not change it? Look, I love my kids. My nature impels me to take care of them. I'd feel terrible if I didn't. Children need a mom and a dad, but if we'd evolved a little bit differently, maybe like guppies, we would eat our children instead of taking care of them. It makes human nature meaningless, you see. And if it is meaningless, then why not change it? I'm not happy with the way that I am. Maybe I can put a chip into my brain and I'll have different feelings, or I'll be smarter. Maybe I can rewire myself in this way or that way. Changing, transcending human nature, treating it as though it's just something to be discarded, we can reinvent ourselves. That's called transhumanism. Transsexualism is just the first movement in that wave of assaults.
Mm. And Dr. Budziszewski, early on in the book, you talk about the fact that one of your friends said, the problem with this book is that the people that need to read it won't, and the people that read it don't really need it. And you've been a little more optimistic. And what made me think about this is years ago, a friend of mine, Paul Meyer, when he was alive, wrote a book called The Workaholic and His Family. And he said, I guess this is a waste because workaholics won't read the book. But the fact is he added a family because even if the workaholics wouldn't read the book, the people around him might, and then get some insight. The same sort of thing is here. Yes, we know a lot of people that believe some of these crazy ideas, but even if you can't get them to read the book, I think this book provides you with some great sort of quick comments and maybe a little bit of logic to help people move away from some of the insanity that they've actually been able to drink deeply of.
Yes, that's right. There's the people who've drunk the Kool-Aid, the poisoned Kool-Aid all the way, who've just swallowed all these lunacies. It's very hard to reach them. They're sort of locked in, although even then, reality touches them at some points, and you can wait, and it's going to break through. But a lot of people aren't there. What it is that they don't accept a lunacy, but they're wondering if something is wrong with them because everybody around them says they ought to accept that lunacy. Or they got 1 foot in the lunacy and 1 foot out, or they've begun to sink into it and they're beginning to think about escaping. Now, I'm writing the book largely for all those kinds of people. The people who are thinking, am I crazy to think that this is a lunacy? No, you're not crazy. You can think clearly. It's possible to do it. You can reestablish contact with your common sense and maybe there even help others, the members of your family, your friends, recover a little bit of common sense.
And again, you have a section on delusions about what is real and unreal. Each person has his own reality, and things are whatever we say they are. But the final one is delusions about God and religion. Religion doesn't concern the truth about God. We can't know the truth about God. The truth is there is no God. Judging what is true is or false is intolerant. Truth about God doesn't matter. But I'm thinking about that one, the truth that there is no God. Hold up our booklet that's based pretty much on Lee Strobel's book on arguments for the existence of God, whether it's Lee Strobel or all sorts of apologists or scientists like Stephen Meyer, the return of the God hypothesis. It's becoming more and more difficult for our atheist friends, even some of your colleagues there at the University of Texas at Austin, to keep holding to a belief of atheism when whether it's science, archaeology, a variety of other things are all coming our direction. So what about that?
Well, I think it has always been the case that the evidence is really for God. The presumption is for God. You have to believe, in order to believe that there's no God, you have to believe all kinds of crazy things. Now, if you have a wrong conception of God, then it's very easy to believe that there's no God. If you think God is like Zeus, or God is like a Marvel superhero, a Marvel comic superhero, then sure, it's easy to believe that that being doesn't exist. But those are beings that are just very powerful beings in the world. God is the creator of the world. He is the source of the meaning of the world, the source of the very possibility of a world, the source of the possibility that anything makes sense in the world. And if you're saying that God doesn't exist, then what you're saying essentially is that nothing makes sense. Nothing, that you can't make sense of anything. You might as well give up the whole thing. Nobody does that. What people try to do is dance on the thin ice covering over the abyss and say, I believe things make sense, but there's no reason why anything makes sense. No, you can't go there.
One of the other ones is the truth about God doesn't matter. Well, yes, it does. You quote from an individual that I've read many times, Steve Levitt, about Freakonomics. And again, he says, well, I just don't think about God. And we recognize the younger generation, many of your students in the class, whether they're Generation Y or now we're getting into Generation Z, maybe don't think about God, but it really does matter. And in some respects, that's why you write many of your books, to get people thinking about the fact that they live in this secular culture. They may not think about God. They may not know there's arguments for God, but you're trying to get them to rethink some of the presuppositions that they've made.
That's true. When people say there's no reason to believe in God, people who say that generally have not looked into the arguments. They say, well, there's no convincing argument that there exists a God. They haven't considered the arguments. There have been centuries and centuries of arguments made for the existence of God. They don't know anything about them. But the idea that the truth about God doesn't matter is even weirder to me. Years ago, when I didn't believe in God, when I didn't believe in good and evil, when I didn't believe in my own personal responsibility for my actions, I was miserable. And I have a hard time, that's one kind of despairing nihilist. I have a hard time understanding the sort of pop culture nihilist who says nothing makes any sense, the truth about God doesn't matter, nothing else matters. That's cool. I think that you have to be suppressing some very deep inclinations built into your mind in order to say that the ultimate meaning of things doesn't matter. People talk about finding themselves. Well, don't you, if you're going to find yourself, doesn't that mean finding the truth of yourself? Don't you have to get in touch with the sources of those truths? If God is practically by definition the most important thing that is, how could the truth about him not matter? Freud used to talk about suppressing our sexual urges and all these things that he thought happened to us when we do that. People don't think much about suppressing our inclination to know the truth about God and what happens to us when we do that. It's a lot worse than anything Freud talked about.
Well, and in Romans 1, it talks about those who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. And so we want to do anything we can except to think about some of these ultimate issues. So let me just, before we wind down, talk not only about the book Pandemic of Lunacy, but we do have a link to the undergroundthomas.org. And there's your teaching, many of your articles. Of course, you have a blog that comes out. You have all sorts of commentaries on Thomas Aquinas and all sorts of other commentaries and resources that would be very helpful to individuals. And of course, you take on very important topics about things like natural law, human sexuality, and a variety of other issues. So as people go to their website, and maybe if they would want to have you come and speak, or they would like to maybe ask you a question, that's available, isn't it?
It absolutely is. It's at the Underground Thomist, thomist.org. They can go there, and they've got the links to all those different things that you just mentioned, as well as a link to the book itself, Pandemic of Lunacy.
Well, again, it's a wonderful book. And again, as I mentioned, 30 different lunacies, 200 pages, very readable, and a resource that would be helpful. Again, a book that I have oftentimes recommended, What You Can't Not Know, because that really helps us understand about moral theology, natural theology, common grace, and a variety of other issues. In some respects, the two books come together. One's kind of a bookend to the other. So, Jay Budziszewski, it is always great to have you on the program. Thank you for writing this book, and thank you for giving us an hour today to talk about it.
Well, thanks for having me on. I've enjoyed talking with you.
We, again, encourage you to find out a little bit more. An individual that has been married for more than 5 decades, been really teaching at the University of Texas at Austin since 1981. If you'd like to know more about him, we have all sorts of information about that on the website. And as I began, a lot of us do wonder what has happened to our world. Seemingly around us, all sorts of people have gone insane. It's so crazy. How many times have around the table we said, you just cannot make this stuff up? And so this is an attempt to really try to patiently explain some of these delusions and to look at how that affects things like morality and politics and government and family and sexuality, as well as theology, God, and religion. And so I think this is a great resource for you, and it would be something that would help you maybe have some good talking points, responses, maybe an antidote to some of the craziness around us. So sometimes just tuning into Point of View helps you realize, no, I'm not crazy. The world around me is crazy. That's all we have for today. We look forward to seeing you next time right here on Point of View Highlights.